Even if this body continues to decay, continues to press on toward the grave, and Jesus doesn't return, we know that this life doesn't end at all. There is hope beyond this life that makes this life seem like nothing. We have a treasure, that's Christ, in jars of clay. That's our mortal bodies. We've already talked about that. And it shows us that this surpassing power, the power to transform us, the power to remake us, the power to make us right with God, doesn't belong to us and what we can accomplish in our mortal bodies. It belongs to God, not to us. And the good news for all believers is God has prepared a home for us in His presence. He didn't prepare for us, and ideally, if it were my way, I would like a cabin by a stream away from everyone. It's kind of how I'm wired. At heart, I'm a country boy, bordering on redneck. But that appeals to me. But in heaven, it won't. In heaven, the presence of Christ will appeal to us. That's the home that He's preparing for us. It's in His presence. John 14, 2 and 3, Jesus said this to the disciples. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Here you might hate crowds, there you'll love it. I don't want to dash your spirits and your dreams, you people who don't like people. You will be in the presence of God and all the believers, and it'll be perfect. It will be like nothing you can imagine in this life. There is a life beyond this life that makes this world lose its attractiveness. And it has to do with God. Not because Aunt Susie's there or Uncle Joe is there or siblings or parents or children are there. It's all because God is there. That's why heaven's so appealing, because God is there. It's His presence that we will behold. The resurrection of Jesus proves that there's another home for the believer. Jesus didn't rise from the dead to nothingness. He rose from the dead, presented Himself to His disciples, went into the presence of the Father, and is preparing a home for us in His presence. Hebrews 9:11 says it this way, but when Christ appeared as a high priest of good things that have come, good things is salvation, then through the greater and more perfect tent, that's death, resurrection, ascension, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Heaven's not made with hands. Just like the first creation of the world wasn't made by hands. The only thing made by hand was Adam. God chose to make Adam from the dust of the earth with His hands. The true Christian has a holy discontent. That's what Paul says by the word groans. A holy discontent with this life, which produces a longing for heaven. We'll see how we get through this sermon. I know there'll be some of this, so I'll tell you, opening morning I got my buck and then I got sick and I haven't been out since, so God was good to me. He's always good to me. Verse 2, for in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. We need to be people who long for heaven, who long to put on that which will clothe us in heaven. The NIV application commentary put it this way: God prepares his people by giving them a foretaste of the glory to come, in order that the suffering of this present age might be put into its proper perspective. And he gives them suffering so that the glory to come might be put into its proper perspective as well. Why does God save us and give us this wonderful new birth? Because it's just a little bitty taste of what being in heaven's going to be like. Those blessings that he gives to us on an earthly level, they're not here just so we can consume them in this world. They're a little foretaste of what it's going to be like to be with Christ forever. And the suffering that he gives us a holy discontent for this world, where we sit back and go, there's got to be something better than this. That's called heaven. Heaven's better than this. But too many Christians live as though this life is all there is. And there's nothing better than this. Paul said it this way in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 19. He said, if in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. Now, this is in the context of people who are saying there's no resurrection, but his point really is this: if all you're living for is the here and now, you should be pitied. And if you're sacrificing for Christ, according to those who don't believe in resurrection, and there's no resurrection, you're to be most pitied, because you should eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you might die. But we as believers should not live as though this is all there is: eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you might die. We should live as though this world is passing away. James says your life is a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. Here today, gone tomorrow. But how do you live? Do you live as though this is all there is? Grab all the gusto you can. You only go around once, whatever commercials they might be, tell you what worth you have in this world? Or do you live as though Christ is all and in all? God says he's given us everything richly to enjoy, but too many Christians have moved the line of enjoyment into what is worship. And we worship and serve created things rather than the Creator. The true Christian must remember that he is clothed in the righteousness of Christ. We're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:3, Paul says, if indeed by putting it on, we may not be found naked. Now, there are lots of controversy about what this verse means. Does it mean our new body in heaven? Probably some allusion to that. But I think most importantly, as the texts go on, you'll find that when he says we're going to be further clothed, he's talking not about the new body, but about that which clothes the believer now, which is the righteousness of Christ. John Calvin, in his Institutes, said this: a man will be justified by faith when, excluded from the righteousness of works, he by faith lays hold of the righteousness of Christ, and clothed in it, appears in the sight of God not as a sinner, but as righteous. Thus, we simply interpret justification as the acceptance with which God receives us into his favor as if we were righteous. And we say that this justification consists in the forgiveness of sins and imputation of the righteousness of Christ. We're clothed not in our own works. We're clothed as believers in the righteousness of Christ. We're clothed in that which is foreign to us. We don't go to heaven because of our righteousness. We go to heaven because of the righteousness of Christ given to us and clothing us. Thank you. The true Christian, being driven by the reality of indwelling sin, groans under its weight, longing for being eternally clothed with Christ's righteousness. I'm convinced that God allows us to struggle with sin simply because it gives us a holy discontent with this life. Why do I do that? Because you're not strong enough on your own not to. Why do I always make that bad decision? Because in this life, we're tempted, we're drawn away and enticed. But why does God leave me in this? Because God's grace is made perfect in weakness. You see, we're not perfect in this life. We will never be perfect in this life, and that's God's plan. We struggle and we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, against those spiritual things that we can't see. And one day we won't. But it won't be on this earth. It'll be in heaven, and we need to be longing for heaven. Not living as though this is it. This is all there is, and it doesn't get any better than this. So we groan under the weight of sin. And in verse 4, Paul says, "For while we are still in this tent, we groan, not being persecuted, being burdened." Not being burdened by lost people, being burdened by indwelling sin. We groan under its weight, longing for being eternally clothed. We groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Paul's saying, look, we're clothed with the righteousness of Christ here, but we haven't seen the full effect of that. We don't live under the full reality of being clothed with the righteousness of Christ. Here, we see in part, we know in part, we get a glimpse of what it means to be victorious over sin, and then it's gone. And we're back at it again. And we struggle with that sin that easily besets us and entangles us and keeps us from running the race. And why? Because there is a finish line, and we keep running toward the finish line, realizing that the finish line is perfection, but not perfection in this world. It's a perfection that comes either at the return of Christ or death. And we ought to long for that perfection. We ought to strive for that perfection. We need to get up when we fall down. We need to run the race marked out for us. There are potholes in this race. There are things that trip us up. There are things that entangle us. But we shouldn't quit the race. We shouldn't stop running the race. We need to keep running, keeping our eyes on the fact that heaven is our home, not this life. A.W. Pink said this in his doctrine of the book of Revelation. He said, to behold God's face by faith is both our duty and comfort in this life. Yet that can only be as we are clothed with the righteousness of Christ, and as we maintain practical righteousness by obedience to God's revealed will. To behold the Lord by open vision will be our occupation and enjoyment in the next life. For now, we're going to struggle. For now, there are going to be those people that drive us crazy. For now, there's going to be those sins that easily beset us. For now, there are going to be those things that we wish weren't. But the reality is that they are. And they will be. Because we live in a world under the curse of sin in which God is refining us so that we look more and more like Christ on the day we meet him.